Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and an appreciation of the wonderful world of chess. I am George Marajanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State College. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 in room C-199 of the McKay Campus School at the college. And with me is once again my trusty co-host, Martin Lane, one of the current Wachusett Chess Club champion and one of the most active chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George. Good to see you again.
It's always a pleasure to see you, Marty, on and off the board. Today, Marty, we're going to show our viewers one of the most famous chess games ever played. In fact, it is probably the most famous game played. It was played in June 1851 in London, England, between Adolf Anderssen and Lionel Kieseritzky. Now, do you know anything about actually any of these players?
Well, what I do know, the little bit that I know, is that they were considered two of the top players in the world at the time. And they were in London for a reason. They were in London for one of the first international tournaments that was being held at the same time. Even though this game was not formally a part of that tournament, this was an informal game between the two players. This
was considered a friendly game.
Right.
What happened actually in this tournament? This was actually this 1851 London tournament, which actually Anderssen won.
Right.
And it was actually as a result of winning this tournament that Anderssen was considered the world's leading player.
Right.
This propelled him into the #1 spot in the world. But he defeated Kieseritzky in round one of this tournament.
Eliminating
him.
Right.
They played they played three games. He won 2 games, drew 1,
right.
And he eliminated Kieseritzky.
Right. So he was out of the tournament.
He was out of the tournament. But he stuck around.
Right, and they played this game.
So they played this game, and this was played actually at the at a chess studio. It was called Simpson's Chess on the Strand Divan, in London. But this was an offhand game, and it's really gone down in the history of chess as the most famous game ever played.
Right. You even have the nickname.
Yes,
the Immortal game.
Yes, the Immortal game. Now, it's interesting. What do you know about actually this designation, the Immortal game?
Well, what I do know is that it didn't really get this designation until several years later.
True.
And I forget that. And I forget
Here's what happened. The game was played in 1851.
Right.
In June of 1851. It wasn't until August 1855 in a Austrian chess magazine. It was a Viennese chess magazine called Wiener Schachzeitung, that an Austrian chess player, a very strong one by the way, Ernst Falkbeer, dubbed this game the Immortal game. Right. In fact, it was called the Unsterbliche, or the Unsterbliche Partie.
Right.
So ever since then, it's actually carried that name,
right.
The Immortal game. So we're going to present to our viewers.
One other thing, you were telling me something really interesting. The loser of this game was Kieseritzky.
Yes.
And when he lost the game, he was so excited that he telegraphed the moves back to his home chess club in Paris.
That is correct. Here is the loser, eager to send the moves of the game back to his club.
Right.
And again, the dubbing of this, the name Immortal Game, appeared in 1855
right.
when this Viennese chess magazine analyzed it, actually went into depth. But so we're going to present, you're absolutely correct. He actually telegraphed the move back to his magazine. And actually this was published in a magazine called La Régence.
Right.
Yeah, which actually did not last long. It was a very short-lived magazine. So let's start with this game. Okay. Anderssen is white. So what did he play as his first move?
He plays the pawn on e2 to e4, which we've talked about a lot. It's a very popular, probably the most popular and the strongest move among chess players. It occupies the center. It opens up lines for both the white bishop and the queen. It's an excellent opening move.
Yes, and very popular back in the 19th century.
Still is.
Yes, as we well know. So what Kieseritzky replied with on his first move was e5, e7, the pawn on e7 moving to e5.
Right. What's good for white is good for black.
Exactly, because he's opening up now the diagonal for his dark squared bishop to come out, as well as he's contesting. It's a contest over the center controlled or centered occupation. So now it's white's turn. Anderssen now plays what?
He plays the pawn on f2 to f4. It's called the King's Gambit. Gambit being he's offering to give up that pawn for free.
Why? Why is this pawn being offered?
What he's doing is he's hoping to deflect the black pawn off that center square, and he's going to go for getting his pieces out quickly. He's going to try to get the bishop out to c4. He can develop the knight to f3. He's going to try to get his pieces out quickly and mount an attack. This game was played during a period in chess when attacking was everything.
In fact, that was the vogue. Yes,
right.
Back in the 19th century, attacking chess was the style it was commonly seen. All right, so now the question is to accept or not to accept. That is the question. Right. And we could actually decline this gambit.
Right, which would be essentially avoiding it.
Yes, you're right. And as the first official world champion, Wilhelm Stein, has said, the refutation of a gambit is usually done with the acceptance of the gambit. If you want to prove that the gambit is unsound, you'll accept the gambit.
Right.
So what Kieseritzky did, he played E takes F4.
Right.
He takes the pawn. All right, so it's Anderson's move, third move coming up.
Okay. Well, here's a couple of choices. The more common move in the King's Gambit is to develop the knight on G1 to F3. That's most commonly seen. What Anderson did was he took his bishop on F1 and played it to C4, a very strong diagonal attacking black's F7 pawn.
Okay, so this is an alternative to knight F3.
Right. It develops a piece, puts the bishop on a strong diagonal.
And by the way, this variation of the King's Gambit accepted, playing bishop to C4, which is known as the King's Bishop's Gambit or the Bishop's Gambit, was favored by Bobby Fischer. The late Bobby Fischer considered this better than playing knight F3.
Right.
And he, in simultaneous exhibitions, he played this, Bobby Fischer did. Back in 1964 when he put on his national simultaneous tour. This was very common with him. All right, so now it's Kieseritzky's turn. And what he is now going to do, he's tempted the fact that the bishop moved out and the knight did not move out, to protecting this H4
That would
square.
be the purpose for moving the
knight
out.
Yes, the purpose of keeping the knight there is to keep the queen out.
Right.
So now Kieseritzky plays queen H4 check.
Right.
Comes out early with the queen, but he has a purpose for bringing the queen out early because he's now going to force the king to move. Why does the king have to move? Why can't we block? Why can't we block here?
If you could block, but this leads to disaster.
Well, okay, so the disaster would be that black could simply capture, F takes G3,
right,
and this pawn on H2 could not capture this pawn on
No,
G3.
he would lose the rook instantly.
But what would happen if the knight came out, the knight on G1, and attacked the queen?
If the knight comes out to from G1 to F3,
attacks the queen,
he can push the pawn, check.
Oh, discovered check.
He can capture the rook, turn it into a queen.
Yes, so he will won a piece.
Right.
If the knight takes the queen on H4, this G2 takes H1
Right.
queen, and he's going to be a piece ahead.
Right.
All right. So this
he
is
can't do that.
So that's why he cannot block. All right. So let's go to the actual position here.
So
on this check.
So he has to move the king.
Sorry. So king.
Moving the king up would be no good because it blocks the queen and could bring other things. So he moves the king over to F1.
It's the only move.
It's the only move.
It's a forced move.
Right.
Okay. So now it's black's turn. Now he could actually develop, start bringing other pieces into play. Knight F6 is possible, even D6 is possible. But he plays a very interesting move here, a rather unusual move. He plays the pawn on B7. He plays B5.
Right.
Okay, wait a minute. Now he is now offering a pawn because this pawn is unprotected.
And what Anderson does is he simply takes it. I suppose the purpose would be to temporarily take the bishop off this key diagonal, but it gives up a pawn for that, and he can always, it's a little difficult to see why, because he can always come back, he can maintain this diagonal, but at least temporarily he's off that diagonal. Okay, so black is able to get that, as you say, the bishop off this very dangerous diagonal here, the A2 to G8 diagonal. Okay, so what Kieseritzky does on his fifth move is play knight F6. Knight on G8 plays knight F6. All right, so now we have an attack on the pawn. The pawn on E4 is attacked. Anderson can either try to defend his pawn, he could do that simply this way, or with the knight to C3. But another way to defend is to move a piece and attack a stronger piece. So he develops his knight to F3, attacking the queen. thereby really protecting the pawn temporarily.
Okay, so he's now forcing that
forces
queen
the
to
queen
move.
to go somewhere.
All right, so the queen. All right, so and also this pawn will eventually come under attack
Right.
if we. So the knight has to move. So what Kieseritzky did here was play queen back to h6. He played queen h6. So now the queen now is used to defend this pawn, and Anderson now continues how?
Well, what he does at this point is he plays the pawn to d3, protecting this pawn, and attacking the f5 pawn with his bishop.
But of course, the queen anticipated that.
Right.
That's why the queen moved here,
Right.
to anticipate the defense of this pawn with the attack on this pawn. Now, what White could have done was also played the knight to c3, protecting the e-pawn, but
Right.
he chose this move, which seems okay. So now what Kieseritzky realized, wait a minute, he's got to add further defense of that f. He wants to maintain that pawn on f4. Remember, he's given a pawn back,
Right.
but he wants this key pawn to stay here. So he plays knight h5.
He's going to double his protection.
So double protection there on the f pawn. All right, so it's Anderson's move.
And now White, again, he could continue his development by playing knight to c3. He could maybe do something with his bishop if he wanted.
Yes.
What he chooses to do is he plays his knight to h4.
Okay, knight h4.
And it sort of it limits somewhat what the queen can do, because the queen can't leave the protection of the knight, because the knight is attacked by the queen. So the queen is really not all that free to move away.
All right. Well, now Kieseritzky, on his move coming up, which is his eighth move, he plays queen g5. Now, what does he threaten with this move?
Well, the queen to g5 threatens the bishop on b5. Now it shows some purpose for the bishop to have been drawn out there because it's under attack.
All right.
Again, there would be a few ways to protect it. One would be something like a4, the knight to c3.
Actually, he has two threats. Not only does his queen attack
but also the knight.
but also the knight. So he's
Right.
attacking two pieces
Right,
at the
he's
same
attacking two
time.
pieces at the same.
So there's got to be a move that White has to play to protect both pieces,
So
to stop the loss of a piece.
He chooses to move the knight to a safe square, f5, which blocks the attack on the queen. The knight is now protected by the e4 pawn, and he's well centralized. He's in a strong position.
All right, very good. All right, so this is the move that saves
Right.
a piece here. So knight f5. So what Kieseritzky does, it's ninth move coming up, he plays c6. The pawn on c7, he moves c6, attacks the bishop.
Right.
Okay, so what does...
Well, here again, the choice would be to move the bishop if he wanted to.
Yes.
But he chooses a counterattack. He turns around and he attacks Black's knight with his pawn.
Aha! So now we have the pawn attacking the knight on h5, and as far as en passant, there's the en
Right,
passant
that
rule, where the pawn actually, it could actually, couldn't be played in this game, but f takes g3 en passant is out of the question.
Right, opens up the queen to an attack.
Because the bishop would win the queen.
Right.
So the en passant is totally ruled out. So with the pawn on g4 attacking the knight, what Kieseritzky did was retreat the knight.
Right.
So he plays knight, and he only has one move here. The knight only has one square to go to,
Right.
and he plays knight f6. All right, so he saves the knight, and now Kieseritzky is attacking this pawn twice, the queen as well as the knight. So he's threatening to win that pawn.
He's threatening to win the pawn. He also has the attack on the bishop, but
Yes.
Anderson chooses to defend the pawn
All
by
right.
playing rook to g1.
All right. Also, he takes time to defend this. He doesn't want to lose this g-pawn. In turn, what he's allowing Kieseritzky to do, Kieseritzky must have looked at this and said, well, okay, you're defending that pawn, but I'm winning this bishop. He plays c takes b5.
Right.
So now he's won a piece, the bishop. All right, so now how does Anderson continue this here?
Well, what any chess player would look at is the queen is out there and is really boxed in by all these pieces.
And look how many moves this queen has made.
Right, the queen and the knight together have been all over that side of the board.
That's the only pieces that have been moving.
Right,
Yeah.
and so he mounts an attack directly on the queen. He plays pawn to h4, attacking the queen.
All right. And as I see it, the queen
And
only has one square
to-
here.
Queen has to move again.
And the only square that they can move to is queen g6. All right, so queen g6, here we are.
So then he attacks again. He plays pawn to h5.
All right, which actually now forces
back to
where it came from. It's
right.
the only square he has.
Only
so queen g5 is forced. All right, so here we are.
And now he moves his, again, the queen has become a target. He's building up pressure. He's going to continue to build up pressure.
The queen can't move. Well,
the queen is limited.
Its
right. Scope is completely limited. This is what a chess player will do. They'll look at a position like this and keep looking for ways to make, to try to trap the queen. And so he plays the queen to f3, now threatening to take this pawn with the bishop, winning the queen.
That's right. If this bishop ever accomplishes that with this position here, the queen is lost.
Right.
All right. So in order to save this queen, we must actually create an escape route for this queen. And the move to do it is to move this knight.
Right.
And the only move we can play here is to retreat the knight
back to where it was,
where it came from, knight g8, which opens up this diagonal for the queen if it comes under attack, which it will, to retreat along this diagonal. All right, so it's White's move, Anderson's move. What does he do on his 15th move?
Continues the attack. Bishop take the pawn on f4.
All right.
Attacking the queen. She's only got 2 squares to go.
Right. Can't go to e7 because the knight on f5 controls the square. So, and I don't think Kizurisi liked the idea of going all the way back and being totally undeveloped back where he started.
Right.
So what he does, he plays queen to f6, which threatens this pawn down
threatens
here.
to win the rook.
And also with the attack on the rook. All right, so remember, he's a piece ahead.
Right, he's a piece ahead.
He was given this bishop, but the trouble is, all he's now is operating with his queen.
Right.
All right. So what is
and White has a rook out, and the queen, and the bishop, and the knight. All these, has to brace threat. So he blocks the threat by simply playing knight to c3. Takes care of that threat.
Okay. All right. So Black has to catch up in development. He's woefully behind in development. So what he does, he plays bishop c5. That's his 16th move.
Right.
The bishop c5 now attacks the rook on g1.
Attacks the rook.
Okay.
Now, Anderson could simply try to defend, by moving his rook.
Yes.
Something like that. But what he does is he chooses to once again attack the queen. Now both of his knights are centralized, attacking the queen, threatening. Knight to c7 check. There are all kinds of things.
He's attacking the queen.
Attacking the queen.
First of all, he's attacking the queen. He's also attacking this square with the forking the king and the rook. All right, so White now must move that queen. It's under attack. So what Black does, Kizurisi does on his 17th move is play queen takes b2. Comes down here, it takes a pawn here, and now has an attack on this rook. The queen is attacking this undefended rook. And the bishop is also attacking this rook. Right. All right, so it's Kizurisi's move.
Right, and when you look at this, you would think, well, he's going to have to try to. Your first reaction would be to try to defend this or move it out of the way, to some sort of safety.
Right.
But Anderson comes up with really a surprising move. He plays bishop to d6.
Okay, this is an outstanding move.
It is.
Okay, now the question here is, by coming here, he's also attacking.
He's attacking that bishop.
Attacking this bishop. Of course, the bishop is protected by the knight.
Right.
The question is, and Kizurisi did not play this, but let's show our viewers with the consequences of taking that bishop instead of taking the rook. What would happen if Black took bishop takes d6? Okay. That would be a major mistake. Why?
Well, first he takes knight take bishop. Check.
Yeah, knight takes d6 check, and he can't go to f8
because queen take pawn.
Queen takes f7 would be mate. All right, so his only move would be going. The only move he has is king d8 because he can't go. That's the only move he has. All right, so now how does White continue?
Well, he could play queen take pawn. He could play knight take pawn check,
which looks stronger because on knight takes f7 check, he only has 1 square left.
Right.
Back to king e8. All right. So now, is it going to be a mate in 2 moves here?
Well, he can bring the knight back, check.
Brings knight to d6, check, forcing the king back to d8, and now the game is over.
Queen down to f8.
Queen f8 is mate.
Right.
All right, so that's why the bishop cannot be taken. All right, so let's go back to the position here. The pawn's here. So this bishop d6, yeah, this is the position. He just played bishop from f4
And the king
to
is
d6.
on e8.
Right, and the king is on e8. All right, so that bishop cannot be taken.
Right.
So what Kizeritsky does, now he has a choice here. He could actually take queen takes a1, but he chose to play bishop takes g1. So he plays bishop takes g1. Okay, so now what does Anderson do here? He's lost what we call the exchange.
Right.
Anytime you take a minor piece, which is either a bishop or a knight, and you win a rook, that's called winning the exchange.
Right.
Because the rook is more valuable than a bishop or a knight. All right, so what does Anderson do?
When you look at it, he's faced with losing the rook with check.
Right.
I mean, he could take the bishop, but it's still going to lose the rook with check.
Right.
But he comes up with yet another surprising move. He ignores all that and plays e5.
Now, what is the purpose of that? You know, in chess, every move has a purpose.
Well, it blocks this diagonal that the queen is on.
Aha.
Which
So now this queen cannot defend this
pawn,
which it was before. You know, because it would stop the knight from taking it.
Right, before the move, it would be knight take pawn check, but the queen could capture.
But now with
blocks
e5,
the diagonal.
now black has some problems. All right, so now what Kizeritsky does, well, this is not looking too good for him, but he figures, hey, wait a minute, I might as well attack as much as I can. He plays queen takes a1 check. So now he's won a second rook.
Right.
Yeah, he was given a bishop initially. Now he's won both rooks, but his position is really looking. Well, he's in check. All right, so
he's
queen a1. So the king now
goes
has
up
to
to
move.
e2.
All right, king e2. All right, so the king is on e2. Now, Marty, here is where there is some controversy as far as what happened. According to Kizeritsky, who, as you say, telegraphed these moves to his chess club in Paris, he claimed he resigned in this position. He resigned after this move. But there are other sources, actually those who watched the game, who reported on this, said, no, Kizeritsky continued to play. And what they said Kizeritsky did was play, first of all, we've got a threat of the knight coming here, check, winning this rook. We also have the threat of the knight taking here. But what Kizeritsky did is knight a6. All right, so knight goes here, which actually adds some protection on this square.
Right.
All right, but now the game's going to be over quickly because Anderson now announced mate. And how did he deliver this mate?
Well, first, he delivers a sort of obvious check. Knight take the pawn on g7 check. That was the whole purpose of the e5 move.
Be able to take that pawn with the knight. All right, so the king only has one square, cannot go to any of these dark squares, f8, e7. They're all controlled by white's pieces. The only square he has is king d8. All right, so he plays king d8.
Right.
So now here comes the most spectacular move.
Right, he's already sacrificed both rooks.
Yes, he has.
He's sacrificed a bishop.
Right. And now
he could, for instance, play queen take pawn, but then it doesn't deliver a check or anything, and it probably will still win. But but the forcing move, the move that forces the final mate, is queen to f6 check. Well, the king can't.
The king cannot move, and he's moving the queen, where the knight. The only move that is playable here is knight takes f6. All right. And we actually have the position on the board. Actually, we have the position with the queen f6 check. We have a diagram position on the board on your television screen. So now what Kizeritsky did was play knight f6. Although there is some controversy whether he continued. Right. But this is how would the game end then?
And then the bishop delivers the checkmate on e7.
Aha. So this knight, which was on g8, was actually controlling or protecting the e7 square, but now it's mate. So I think actually this is a 23-move checkmate, and as I stated at the beginning of the program, this is the most famous chess game ever played. And anyone who's serious about chess should familiarize himself or herself with this game. Right. I mean, it's a fantastic game. It will always live. It will remain, in the annals of chess. It's brilliant.
One thing that was interesting about this game, the opening variation that we played isn't played very often in modern chess, where
No.
But it did occur in 1993.
Yes, it did.
Between a British player, Nigel Short, and at that time, he was a world champion.
He was
by
world
that time,
champion.
Gary Kasparov by that time, and they played the similar variation up to about move 7, I think it was.
Yes.
And interestingly, it was also played in London, almost 150 years later.
What a coincidence that it was played.
And it was also sort of an offhand game because it wasn't part of.
Yes, it wasn't part of any
They were
tournament.
playing a world championship in London at that.
But this was not part of the
No, it was
world
called,
championship match. Yeah.
It was some offhand, again, an informal game of some sort.
Okay. Now, I don't know, I think we actually, I don't know whether we've shown it already, actually we have a photo of Anderson. We also have an illustration of Kieseritzky. There is a very nice photo of Anderson taken probably after this game was played. Because, here he is, he's prematurely bald, he's very tall man. And let me tell you something about Anderson. He was born in Breslau, Germany, which is now actually, it's now Wrocław, Poland. But back then, he studied mathematics. He became a teacher. Actually, his profession was mathematics. He taught at the Friedrichs Gymnasium in Breslau. But he went to London in 1851 to play in this international tournament. And you know what? At that same year, in 1851, there was a great exhibition in London.
Right.
And he was asked. It was interesting. He was asked. They asked him, Meister Anderson, why did you go and see the great exhibition? Here is the great exhibition.
Well,
in London.
it was a great exhibition of industry and science.
Yes.
It was like a precursor of the World's Fairs that became so famous in the 20th century.
Thousands of people
Right.
coming, from Europe.
Right.
So you know what his reply was? He says, I came to London to play chess. Right. So he had no desire to go and see the great exhibition. Again, he was a mathematics teacher. He never married. He lived with his mother and sister in Breslau. And again, he was one of the leading players of the 19th century. And you know what he did? Now, we have done a program on Paul Morphy, the great American player. And he was able to play Morphy in
Paris.
In Paris.
5 years later.
Right, he went to Paris and played Morphy at the Café de la Régence.
Right. Same club where he had transmitted back the...
And this was a very famous club.
Right.
You know actually who played there at the Café de la Régence?
Jefferson and Franklin.
Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson. You had French writers, Voltaire,
right.
Rousseau, the philosopher, right. Robespierre. This was a cafe opened in Paris. It was actually opened by an American in 1670. I found it fascinating that an American actually opened this cafe, and it was chess players hanged out at this place. Right. This was the place where chess players came. It was a precursor to the old coffee house, but it was a cafe, and they had a chess room. You know. So it was many famous games were played there too.
Well, we need to wrap this up.
Yeah, I think we do. One final thing about Leonid Kieseritzky, a tragic figure. He died penniless. Actually, he came to Paris at an early age, and he used to give lessons at the Café de la Régence. He also, for 5 francs an hour, he would take lessons, or he'd play somebody for 5 francs an hour. So, but he died penniless. No one came to his funeral. None of the people who were, admired his play contributed one franc to his funeral, and he died a very tragic figure because he was narcissistic. He had a very strong, tongue, and not liked by many people. So, anyway, Marty, I think we had a very fantastic game to present to our viewers. I hope they appreciated seeing a game that they should familiarize themselves again. Go to Google, just type in the Immortal game in chess, and up will pop this game with all kinds of analysis. So I hope you join us next time for an exciting game that Marty and I will present to you on the next episode of Chess Chat.